Welcome to episode 54 of Mondays with Mike. This is another 30-minute episode, and it's Harmony's turn. That's me. We discuss Mike's Zoom birthday event initially, a bit, and then Mike listens as I share some insights and new feelings about a past partnership of mine. My share focuses mostly on my own and my partner's communication skills at the time during a particular encounter. My partner is on the autism spectrum, and I am not. We hope you enjoy this episode. Yeah, and I was remembering, actually, I think I remembered it partway into arriving that you had asked people for appreciations, and I remember we'd had that conversation that I suggested that for you. Do you remember that conversation we had where I talked about
Yes,
doing that my own
you'd had an
birthday?
online gathering and you couldn't remember exactly what you asked for, but yeah, I didn't ask for appreciation. I asked for anything that had passed between us that had been meaningful.
Yes, exactly. More precise.
Which is not necessarily appreciation, because I
Yeah,
realised what a complete bastard you are, and
yeah,
that was really
right. Yeah, I think,
that was a life-changing experience.
yeah, 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 that's more precise. I had done an in-person birthday on my 52nd birthday. See me, feel me, touch me, heal me, and then an invitation for people to let me know, how I had impacted them, something like that. So sort of a similar frame. Yeah, and it was really potent. I was really surprised at how touched I was by what people brought that I didn't know, like,
Mm.
yeah,
It's a bit sad that we could go through lives without realising that.
exactly. Exactly. And our culture doesn't necessarily emphasize that aspect of relationship to let people know, except maybe in our special relationships with our partner or our kids or something. Yeah.
More generally, we're most likely to mention how somebody affected us at their funeral,
Right. Or when
which is
we're
a bit
really
bloody late.
or when we're really angry, and then we're saying you're
Yeah,
having a bad
mm,
effect on me, but the good
yeah.
effects get sort of downplayed or just dropped out, which is unfortunate, I think, because yeah, that sort of, if it's all right with you, that sort of segues me into what I realize I could share about today.
Yeah, good.
Okay. So this morning, I listened to a probably 10-year-old, at least, maybe more, recording of
Hmm.
my own recording.
Remember you saying you had lots of stuff going back years.
And I had taken sort of a break and then heard a snippet, and then this morning thought, okay, I'm going to see what that is. And what it was a series of recordings I made with my Asperger partner when I was with him.
Mm-hmm.
And they really focused on just sort of one, trying to look at sort of one, a little bit extended interaction. And so I reviewed what I thought had happened in the interaction. I recorded that. And then I thought I'd recorded he and I live, sort of trying to process, but that didn't get recorded. So then I, remembered it onto the recording. And there was a little bit of our live interaction also. So it was a series of about 8 or 9 recordings, separate recordings, but all kind of folderized together. So they made some sense. And I had kind of forgotten how painful that relationship was at times.
Mm.
And we just had a lot of difficulty communicating. And sort of an overarching kind of lesson for me was, even when I think I'm communicating with someone and they're receiving my message, oftentimes that's not even the case. whether they're Asperger or normal or whoever they are, you know? And I actually realized that when I was in relationship with Frank. His name's Frank. I thought, oh, I'd made this assumption that when I speak, you get it. And when you speak, I get it. And we're, you know, like we're really understanding each other's experiences. So we had in this recording section, what became visible to me was a couple of things. One was, well, an example was I was speaking to him about something that I was really focused on, and I really thought he was listening deeply. And I was just, you know, and then as I was speaking, he'd been laying down on his back. He got up and he came over to the stool I was sitting on and he started examining how it was made. And I interpreted that to mean he had stopped focusing on what I was saying and instead, you know, found something else that was interesting him. And that was my assumption. And I said, Frank's distracted. I just said it out loud as I was speaking. And it turns out through a lot of convoluted but painful conversation, he let me know that when he's really focused, this is what he does. He starts doing some movement, or he sort of bifocuses, and it helps him stay focused, or it shows that he's focused. Which is the last thing.
Yeah. So that was really difficult for you to interpret what was going on.
Exactly. My default was, whoa, you're on another page now. You're not with me, you know? And then listening to these recordings, I realized how difficult it was to actually kind of be heard by each other and move through that all the way to perhaps, what I was suggesting for him was, because he had said this happens a lot for him. He, you know, is listening to someone and then he does something and they get annoyed because he's doing this other thing. And I said, well, you know, maybe you could consider letting them know in advance that this is what you do and it shows you're really listening. Or as you start to become active, you could say, hey, you may think I'm not listening, but I'm really listening, and this shows it, just to help people understand how you operate. And I think he received that in the communication, but somehow, as is my way, I kept going. So I added another layer onto that. And he pretty much froze and said, well, that was too much. And now I don't know what you said in the first place, the first layer. So.
So he got overloaded, I guess.
Yeah. And so that was painful, and disappointing on my part. I'd really been very careful to try to reach him, and then it was just gone, you know, so like the work, the time, the focus. And then a second layer was that on the same subject, I started talking and he just put his hands over his ears, which I was triggered by also. And then I tried to explain to him that that just felt really rude. But when we finally got to it, he was trying to indicate to me that I was over, you know, that I was past his ability to absorb. And this was how he was showing me. Yeah.
It's a real struggle to communicate. So the gestures misunderstood.
And he at some point after this kind of deep he went off to go see someone else. And it was, he left to go see someone who, yeah, he was also relating to. And I was left by myself, angry that he'd left initially, and then processed what had happened, like really kind of stayed with myself. And when he came back, I asked how he was, and he said he was frozen. And he'd been frozen from the time he left, even with the other person, even that whole time, even coming back. Or stuck. I think his word was stuck. He was just like short-circuited, which I'd seen before. This wasn't new, but it was. And I knew I didn't take full responsibility, but I was pretty sure it might have had something to do with our interaction right before he left. So I asked him if he'd be willing. I forget how I said it, but I said, I think I may have an explanation for why you're stuck and could help you get unstuck. And he was receptive. And I took him through point by point the entire dialogues that we'd had, what had happened. There's more detail than I can share with you here. But in the end, he became unstuck. He just popped out of it. It worked. Like I had followed for him. What he couldn't do was really track his own process. And so I had kept track of it and sort of slowly laid it out, his and my interaction, where, what had happened, when he left, what I thought. And he, with that understanding, he just kind of woke up. And then a little later on the same subject matter, I privately got quiet and reflected on the whole process. And my conclusion sort of was, we both were looking for the kind of attention that what I would call mothering. Like I needed mother and he needed mother. And neither of us, neither of us.
Neither of you had the capacity to do that for the other.
Right.
In that situation.
Partly because we both needed it at the same time, more or less. And also because I didn't have mother as a child. I mean, I had some semblance of mother, but the kind of mother that sort of NVC has taught me about, like a certain way of listening with resonance and with empathy and, waiting. And if I'm triggered, how to calm myself down and, listen. I didn't have that and he didn't have that either. So as a child. So here we both were getting to a place where when I was intensely emotional and just thinking, oh, I have a mother listening, and he was overloaded. He couldn't do it. Or when he was trying to communicate to me and I couldn't be the mother then either. I got overloaded by him. And just how tragic that felt to me. I got in touch with the grief and the mourning around that. This like,
you say this is something you realized today listening to the recording that
no,
you didn't
this
realize
was,
at the
I
time.
had realized it. It was in my last recording, this realization.
So, right. So you had realized it at the time.
Back then. This was 2007 or something. So a good 12 or 13 years ago, I guess, if numbers aren't my thing, but. And I felt the emotion take me over of just that. I could hear it in my voice in the recording, the sadness and the tragedy, really. And not just because it's he and I, but I thought it's global. Like how many of us have really had the kind of mothering that would allow us to then, be a good mother. to others, even if we're in an adult relationship, but to have that kind of energy available because we received it and learned it, you know. Yeah. And I guess, we stayed together 4 years, and they were hard years. But they were also really valuable and good years. And just as the way that I was able to sort of bring him back from being stuck in that moment that I described here, he also had several profound interactions with me where I was able to wake up and see, my own self-imposed negativity patterns that don't function for me, that I was unaware of. And so there were huge gifts there. And he's still someone I am in contact with. And it made me want to reach out to him today, and I probably will. But I also have reached out to him recently and realized, even so, when we get on the phone together, well, I've learned actually to not judge or assume or try to fix, but to slow down and really see with each sentence or two if we're being understood by each other, and just like take it through very slowly. And by doing that, I find his capacity and it doesn't really stretch mine, because I have the capacity, and the thing I want is connection. That's what nourishes me, is that actual sharing, meeting. Yeah.
Co-regulating.
Yeah.
Just that quality of companionship.
Yeah. Yeah. And just in the same way that I said, I think during your birthday, there's some way that you have a sort of a slower pace, maybe. When I join you at that pace, or when I regulate from you to also be at that pace, that feels like a really comfortable home space for me.
That's interesting, because I've assumed that you were sort of higher pace, higher energy than me, and that you would find it not necessarily comfortable
Right.
to slow.
Yeah.
I might even find it frustrating.
Right. And the truth is, what I learned, my strategy, at least this is how I try to verbalize it, was to just go really fast. Just go fast. And so fast that I'm not even with myself. But I manage my emotions, like my own energy, by just overriding and going fast, because there's just so much in the slow. and feeling it, that the feelings seem, oh, I don't want those feelings, so I just go fast. Not.
Okay, I assumed it was, yeah, okay. I was thinking that you had 50 things to say, and if you didn't get them all packed in quickly, the time was going to run out.
And it is that as well. But that comes from, there's no room, no one wants to listen. So if I'm ever going to get hurt, I better just go 100 miles an hour and say it.
Mm.
It could,
So the alternative is to just think, we've only got 70, 80, 90 years each. There's an awful lot of things we're never going to get around to.
Exactly. That, as
And one
well
of them
as,
might be, I'm never going to get to say that thing.
yeah, yeah. So, and to realize again that saying that thing is a little like being right. We've talked about being right or being connected.
Mm.
So, getting seen versus connecting. And so to realize, oh, it's the connecting that really feeds me.
Mm.
And that's where I feel the seenest. Not by spouting all the things that come into my mind and that I have, that's that. Yeah. And my mind is really fast and it pushes people away. So I lose the connection if I try to,
Mm.
do that. Mm. And that
Mm.
reminds me, I know we're almost at time, but the last piece I think to close the loop is that during your birthday, I said that also, that I think a lot of our nervous systems actually want to go slower, not just yours,
Mm.
for whatever reason that you want to name it. I'm really realizing that there's many people like me who have been pushed into speeding up in some way and not realized they've lost their own real nourishing, sustainable pace of being.
Mm. We spent our lives in a civilization that worships sort of speed and efficiency and productivity. So we've come right from our earliest years. We've come to tune it. Our sense of time is given to us by somebody else rather than looking inside ourselves and saying,
Mm-hmm.
what works for me?
Yeah, exactly. How many times have people said, get to the point?
Mm.
Know?
Well, I would say that sometimes.
Yeah. Well, we all
Depends on the
do,
context.
but then
Mm.
it really is like my partner Frank, allowing him the speed, it's my own impatience maybe to be with someone at the speed they are, and just accompany them. That makes me want to make them get to the point. Or I've scheduled something and I don't have time.
Mm.
I only have a minute, get to the point, right? And so, yeah.
Something came to mind for me when you talked about Frank getting unstuck. Can I share that?
Please.
When you first began that part of the conversation, I was a little alarmed, and I'm glad it worked out. Um, there's different experiences for different people, and when Frank was apparently stuck, I had assumed that he was, if he's neuroatypical, that he was overwhelmed and approaching meltdown and basically shutting down. and that more words were the last thing he needed. So it was quite a relief that in that situation that I had misunderstood his state, because I've been in that state, the shutdown state, and I had more words, I just go ballistic.
Yeah.
And when it's bad, it's happened in the last few years. It's happened twice. It's happened to me badly. I've had a bad meltdown, and it takes more than 24 hours to return to baseline. It's really quite shocking the how serious, how wide ranging the effect can be.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So it can be a really unpleasant 24 hours, and then I'll start to oh,
Yeah.
arrive back at myself. But it's yeah, the nervous system can be really badly disrupted.
Yeah. Yeah. And Frank had those moments too,
Mm.
where he, and I learned those as well.
So there's some skill in recognizing which is which.
Right. And this one, what I'd remembered was, and what I suspected was, when I'd said, well, when you use your movement, you start moving around as you focus, that disturbs me. Like I get distracted. So, and we'd gotten through that in the conversation, but then with more words, he'd lost that understanding. And
Mm.
what he had done is sort of shut his whole self down so that he could be a good listener, which was not what my intention of the conversation,
Yeah.
and so somehow me being able to take him through that whole conversation so he could receive that again, that I wasn't saying for him to shut down. I was adapting to that and understanding it.
Mm.
That clarity made sense to him at the time and pulled him out.
Good.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're both, I really appreciate your own experience of the overload and then the difficult recovery as well. And that words
Mm.
don't help at that time at all. It's just one more piece of noise, yeah. So, but thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Really sweet for you to have those recordings from so long ago.
Yeah. Yeah. It's been pretty amazing. It gives me kind of perspective on myself too. Like, oh, you know, um, and I didn't say, but part of in the recording is I said to him, well, at some point when we were having this transaction, then there was a pause, and I realized, when I'd said you're distracted, I said, if I had done that NVC way, so I was already immersed in NVC, I said, I would have said something like, when I'm deeply processing and sharing and you start moving, this is how I feel, because, I feel distracted and upset because I need to know you're really listening. Or, I wasn't perfect at it, but, just to follow like what was happening and speak it differently. And he heard that when I did it that way.
Mm.
So one of my favorite sayings with people is,
Mm.
I was going to preface it this time with, life is hard, but it just keeps happening. So you
Yeah.
might as well jump on that pony and ride, it's like,
Right up until it doesn't. Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Mm.
That was good.
Good.
Thank you for listening.
Uh,
Yeah.
it was really interesting to hear. I really appreciate you sharing that, because that's quite personal, quite intimate. So it's good to hear it.
Yeah. I'm
Thank
glad.
you.
I'm glad it was
Mm.
nourishing for you, or interesting, or,
Mm.
yeah. Perfect.
Good.
So we can close, right?
Yeah.
Well, I said a lot in my share, just how I appreciate you, and at your birthday. Um, And I feel a bit redeemed because last week I don't think I listened to you so well. And I hope to improve. So thank you for hanging in here with me. And I'm complete.
Thank you. I appreciate you sharing that, and it's quite it's interesting that you would have something or stuff that old that's still useful and still insightful. I think if I listened to myself from 14 years ago, I'd be embarrassed. So that's interesting and good to hear.
Yeah.
I might talk about the last 9 years for me next week.
Wonderful. That I would welcome that. Yeah.
Good. I'm complete.
All right, let's do our signature sign off then.
Let's do that thing. And
Yes, we do.
I probably shan't see you until next Monday now.
All right.
We shall see. Have a great week.
Thank you. You too. And happy birthday
Be well.
again.